key to reach a high level of automation is to work together with our customers. We need to learn how our new technology can help and give value to our customers. Then we can bring new technology, even self-driving trucks, fast to market. Volvo is investing in research and driving development when it comes to automation. The teams at Volvo Trucks also work on a number of pilots together with customers around the globe, which are constantly at various stages of completion. This shows an agricultural pilot in Brazil, where Volvo has automated the lateral performance of a sugarcane truck to increase the crops during harvest. There are more examples.
Together with our mining partner, Boliden, we have developed a fully automated hauling system that increases productivity with about 100%. What is really exciting is when we are taking the technology from Boliden, we are deploying it into public roads. We are doing that in a pilot with Renault, the waste management giant in Gothenburg.
These pilots help to establish if a solution is viable in practice and are ideally road tested in collaboration with the customer they're being designed for. We learn fast through quick sprints if a particular solution will help the customer. Where we stand today is that several features are under development. Controlled areas such as work yards, harbors, and construction sites will achieve a high automation level earlier than on road. We are using our learnings from confined areas for public road solutions.
As Volvo's technical specialist in automation, I'm really looking forward towards new pilots with customers.
So excuse the commercial, this is really technology that all of the OEMs are working on to bring to market faster. And as you saw in the video, the focus is primarily on areas where it may be dangerous for the driver, like in mines or in construction sites, or slow-moving areas. It's nothing out in the open road, but for the potential technology with the vehicle-to-vehicle platooning technology. Thank you.
Chairman Schuster, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member DeFazio, and Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me today. The National Safety Council vision is to eliminate preventable deaths, and we believe that all vehicle crashes are 100% preventable. As you well know, the U.S. has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on behavior change behind the wheel, and there have been great successes from this effort, but we still experience over 40,000 fatalities on our roadways each year. Of these, 30% are due to alcohol-impaired driving, 30% are due to speeding, half of those killed are unbelted, and thousands more are due to distraction. It's clear that we must look beyond behavior change to other solutions to deal with the fact that over 100 people die each day on our roadways. Greater technology in our vehicles, all vehicles, can help reduce these statistics. Trucks make up about 4% of the vehicles on the roadways, but are involved in about 11% of the fatalities. Physics is an easy explanation, but technology can change this. All vehicles share the roads, and they should not be subject to different standards and regulations. And I look forward to talking with you more about this today.
Good morning. My name is Larry Willis. I am president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. We represent 32 unions in all modes in areas of transportation. Again, let me thank the committee for inviting us here to share our views. And not to be the negative person on the panel, but as you can imagine, we approach this debate with a little bit of skepticism. We agree with Mr. DeFazio and others that this technology is moving forward, but we have really serious concerns about the impact it is going to have on employment on the bus and truck sector. We don't think our economy is prepared to absorb the type of job dislocation and downward pressure on wages that we think we could see. And quite frankly, we think there is an obligation for policymakers to react proactively to help us deal with this issue. You know, there's a lot of different estimates being thrown around on the impacts. Obviously, while it's moving quickly, it's still unclear about how some of these technologies are going to get implemented from a commercial perspective. But we've seen estimates between 3 or 4 million commercial drivers on the bus and truck side that could be in jeopardy with the advancement of driverless cars. And you combine that with the reality, and again, I represent unions and workers and other segments of transportation and obviously the broader labor movement. And we know that advanced technology, automation generally, is invading other areas of our economy now and into the immediate future. So if you have driverless vehicles take hold, you have a bus driver or a truck driver that no longer has the skill set to do his or her job, the opportunities in the broader economy, because of automation in other places, we think give us real areas of concern here. And as we look at this issue, we're also concerned about the speed of this transition. And again, we don't think that our economy is in a position to absorb these type of jobs and to create other opportunities for our members. We have to get the labor policies right here. And I think it's, again, imperative around elected leaders, stakeholders, to sort of find the right balance here between allowing these technologies to move forward where they make sense from a safety perspective, but thinking about, how we deal with these unemployed, underemployed workers that are going to be a byproduct of this transition. We have seen other transitions for frontline workers, trade and other technology advancements, and quite frankly, too many workers were left behind in those transitions, even when we had, for example, on the trade debate, trade adjustment programs, didn't really do enough for frontline workers and really put a drag on certain segments of our economy and certain regions of our economy. We need to learn from those mistakes and do a better job, not only in the training and job placement of workers, but thinking about longer-term types of assistance that need to be provided. So there are a lot of moving parts for us. While the debate around this table today centers around bus and trucks, we are looking at this from a broader perspective and the impact this is going to have on our economy. So we want to get the labor policy right. We want to get the safety policy right. At the end of the day, we can have a debate of whether full implementation here is going to be safer for truck drivers and bus drivers, or I should say for vehicle safety. But there's a lot of issues in the interim on the safety side that we also need to get right here. So again, thank you for inviting me and looking forward to engaging in the discussion.
Questions?
Yeah, why don't I just put the labor question on the table? There's a shortage of truck drivers in the United States. Every time we have a bill, that issue comes up. If anything, we need truck drivers. Now, our experience in this country with automation has generally not been negative. If you look historically, for example, at the Ford assembly line, everybody thought, oh my God, there goes, you're not going to have individuals sitting, putting together cars, they're going to go down a line and we're going to lose jobs. Well, you made more cars and the assembly line made more jobs. This looks like it's a horse of a different color, and I need to know whether it is. One, since there's a shortage of truck drivers, does this do more than help eliminate that shortage? Two, the skills it takes to drive, particularly a big truck today, are extraordinary. I mean, all you got to do is to go down behind the Rayburn building and look at a truck driver trying to back a truck into that building, and you will be amazed at the skill he is showing. So those are my two questions. Are those skills useful other ways? In other ways, are we going to make up for a chronic driver shortage in part this way, or will it take jobs? Since we know we can't stop in a market economy, you don't even try to stop the development of technology. If anything, we're very inclined to go gradually. Will that help take care of the situation with jobs? Does Congress have a responsibility to take these skills that truck drivers have and help convert them into some other usable state? Mr. Willis, or any of you who have any thoughts on that, I'd like to hear it. There are hundreds of thousands of people in the country and families thinking about that issue as I speak.
I'd like to make a couple of comments on the concerns about labor. And there is a driver shortage. We need about 50,000 drivers a year right now to keep up with the demand. We will need a lot more than that. You think we have a driver shortage right now? We have an aging workforce. We are going to have a huge number of very professional and skillful people retiring in 10 or 15 years. The problem is going to get increasingly more challenging. I believe that automation can make the driving job better, can be more fulfilling type of work. A lot of the younger people coming to the workforce today like working with computers and like working with emerging technologies. They're early adopters. And so as we adopt this in the transportation industry, it's going to make the job more appealing to the younger population to consider driving, and if we expand the jobs. Also want to say the economy, as it grows and continues to have a solid pace, is going to put even more demands on our necessity of drivers. An example of some automation we're seeing in the transportation industry right now is manual transmission tractors. Typically, we've had manual transmissions. Now we're shifting to automatic transmissions at a pretty rapid rate. The longer-term drivers were resistant to that initially until they drove them. And now they tell us that I think this is going to extend my working career because it's not as hard on my knees and my shoulders and my elbows. So that's an example where we're seeing automation. Our percent is fairly low. There's a lot of, we're probably 10 to 15% automatic, but all the new trucks that we're speccing are coming with it. It'll take us 3 or 4 years to get 100% automatic. A lot of our larger competitors are already there, and they're seeing the benefits of that from the health and welfare of the driver, as well as making the job a little bit easier for them to do. So I think we've got a big challenge ahead with the driver shortage. I think some of this driver-assisted technology and automation can help. I can see an environment, and this is going to be an evolutionary process. There's safety benefits to be reaped right now and in the foreseeable future as we're on this path. But I believe that it's going to produce opportunities. As an example, we could have a case where there could be autonomous driving on an interstate highway. And we may stage trucks at an entry ramp or an exit ramp at a staging station, and it could improve the quality of the driving job where a skillful driver living in Dallas, Texas could be at home at night, and he would go out to the staging area with a truck and take it and deliver it in the most difficult driving environment in the city, and then bring a load out and let the more mundane, monotonous aspects of the job be automated. So there's some scenarios you can imagine where the driver, we use him where he is most skillful and his skills are in great need, but we could let other things, autonomous work, be performed on the things that are less desirable.
Well, let me make a couple comments here in response to your question. I would let the Teamsters speak more directly to the driver shortage, but I think the bigger issue here is figuring out a way to, quite frankly, pay those drivers better and have a better benefit package and create, better jobs from a compensation perspective. I think that's the real issue there. I do think it's a difficult argument for the industry to make, to say that this type of technology is not going to replace jobs where the driver is indispensable, yet it is somehow a solution to the driver shortage they keep talking about. I think it's sort of difficult to have that both ways. And again, to speak to your question earlier, yes, I do think that there is an obligation for Congress to come forward and for policymakers to come forward more broadly and think about how you have to retrain those drivers. Those are specific skill sets that are specific to that occupation. And as you have some of this automation and autonomous vehicles move forward on both the bus and truck side, we have to think about aggressive policies. First, trying to think about continuity of employment within an agency on the transit or bus side or within a company. But where that's not possible, think about really advanced ways to train workers for the next jobs that are coming in this economy. The concept that you're going to have a bus or truck driver lose their job, and as I said earlier, sort of look in other sectors for employment in this economy is, I think, sort of a foolish proposition that the market is just going to take care of it by itself.
I just want to say, part of the reason there's a huge driver shortage, it's a rough job. It's a tough job. People don't want to do it. So we have to find ways to get more to come into the industry. And that's a lot of the technology that we're designing, is to make it cooler. I mean, we want newer, younger drivers to come in, and part of the automation is just that, to lure more drivers in. I'd also say that the technology, one of the reasons the driver shortage is so severe is not only because of the toughness of the job, but they have to stay away from home for a long time. And, it's just not a lifestyle that a lot of people want. So some of the technology helps with better planning, better load optimization, better routing. So we do things to get the driver to get to stay home more often. So these are all technologies. It's actually all about attracting the driver. Oh, and I'd love to say, we like to design new automation technology to relax but not replace the driver.
Yeah, I think thinking about the drivers, just one thing to think about too, the last year that we have data from 2015, we lost 667 truck drivers because of fatal crashes on the roadways too. And I think to the extent that we're able to automate some of these things so that mistakes aren't made, whether it's the truck driver or a vehicle driver, personal vehicle driver, I think the better off we'll be for safety on the roadways.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. I'm Brian Babin from Texas. Used to be a truck driver at one time, and became a dentist. But I'm in here to try to pull some teeth and get some answers. I was elected to Congress about 3 years ago, and the ELD mandate was passed 4 or 5 years ago. But I have since kind of taken up that cause. It's kind of a moot point now because it's going to take effect on the 18th of this month, just a few days before Christmas time. We're all talking about a shortage of drivers. And I think the ELD mandate is going to be a good example of what's going to not increase drivers. I think we'll have an acute loss of drivers over the next few months. And I know some of you in here certainly disagree with me. But I think we'll have a lesser pool of drivers. We'll have a lesser pool of people who want to better themselves, buy their own truck. And if we keep creating mandates for them, I think it's going to make it very, very difficult for small business people, independent truckers, to go into business for themselves. And so what I would, my question it would be along those same lines, these technologies that you're talking about, Ms. Terry, and some of these, I'm looking at the video, Ms. Alt, that you showed, some fantastic things that are just around the corner. In fact, some of them even in play now. Collision warning systems, automatic brake systems, awareness, situational awareness technology have great promise. And I certainly don't think that we in Washington should have play a part in preventing or inhibiting any of the beginning of usage of these technologies. But that being said, What can we do up here to ensure that any mandate, like the ELD, for instance, and their future inclusion in new vehicles or as a requirement for state intercommerce meets the absolute highest levels of necessity, like seat belts and airbags, rather than as an optional technology that vehicle manufacturers, fleet owners, and independent operators can choose from to make their lives better. For instance, if you like your ELD, you should be able to keep your ELD. I just don't think it ought to be a mandate right now. I'm not trying to prohibit it or inhibit it in any way. It's just something I think that we need a little more time to work those bugs out. So what can we do up here to prohibit or prevent in the future these mandates that may be more bureaucracy that makes business more expensive, lowers the number of jobs available, and hurts our fleet owners because they don't have enough drivers? What can we do? Any of you witnesses?
Well, I'll comment, and I'll first say I just respectfully disagree with you on the
I knew you would.
mandate.
I knew you would, Mr. Woodruff.
I think that there is a certain level of requirements that derive benefit to the public that we need to look at, and we need to consider whether or not there's enough good to require those. But first, I think it's necessary to have voluntary adoptions of these technologies, testing of them, deployment of them, evaluating the benefits, and then it's maybe appropriate when there's a certain adoption level to consider whether or not they should be mandated for all. So maybe as an example, and to speak specifically about our experience with certain technologies, forward collision warning systems, which is maybe a broad term for a grouping of these technologies, but would be like adaptive cruise control, forward collision warning alerts. So adaptive cruise control will maintain a following distance from the vehicle ahead of about 3.5 to 3.6 seconds when in cruise control. Alerting systems can alert the driver if their following distance collapses to a point where they may need to back out of that a little bit. It includes emergency braking. So in our case, we have 96% of our fleet, about 13,000 tractors, have the forward collision warning systems that have those technologies. We are seeing a 60% reduction in rear end accident frequency. There are still rear ends that happen, but those are usually more minor in nature. They're in stop and go type of traffic. We're seeing cases where the accident severity is much lower when it does happen because the braking applies. It takes a lot of energy out of the impact. So while it doesn't prevent all of them, it does mitigate the outcomes of many. The OEs that I have spoken with, I've talked to two large ones recently. Those are being voluntarily adopted in 2017 at 55 to 60% of the vehicles they produced had these technologies, which I think is a pretty good adoption rate. So I think when you start to see that type of adoption, that tells you it's a pretty good technology, and then it might cause the need to think about, well, what about the remaining percent that begins to get smaller and smaller? Why are they not taking those technologies? And then should they? And so I just think there's some consideration that has to be given to the public benefit at some point that says maybe there's enough benefit that we need to mandate that.
Anybody else want to take a stab at it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
The National Safety Council does support ELDs. We think that they can provide a lot of great data about operational data that can be used to help improve process and safety in the trucking industry. And I think from a standpoint of just mandates in general, for technology that has had some time to be shown and tested and proven to be safety crucial, that mandates can be really necessary. As you know, some manufacturers, they want that regulatory certainty before incorporating some of these features into vehicles that they're manufacturing. And then there's the fleet turnover issue too. So even if you know a particular technology may be worthwhile to incorporate, it's going to take decades, especially in personal vehicles, for a majority of the vehicles on the roadways to have some of those safety beneficial technologies too. So I think for those, definitely for the proven technologies, we would support having some type of mandate for incorporating those into new vehicles.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting topic to me. As a matter of fact, for a year now, I've been working on legislation to see if we can come up with some kind of training to enter into and not destabilize employees that we have now with training. I've worked with MIT, Texas A&M Transportation Institute, and UTA because I am from Dallas, Texas, where we have a lot of high-tech and a major, major trade center. And so I started with the Teamsters because we have the largest local in the country, and it's really because of moving goods by trucks. We have an inland port. And so I see this on the horizon, and I've been in touch with leaders across the way now. Even our local transportation system is looking at automation through the buses. Greyhound is already looking at it. So I don't think it's a matter of whether or not we're going to have it. I think it's how we're going to be able to deal with it as it's phased in. I am trying to structure the legislation, and recently had a hearing on blue-collar STEM to talk about training so that the persons in the industries that's not going to be retiring out would have some stabilization and transition. I'd like your view on retraining programs and where we would focus on the training from the industry, from educational institutions, and whose responsibility is it? Does the government have a role? So I'd like to have the panel members to comment on that.
Let me start. As I said earlier, I do think policymakers do have a role here in making sure that we have the right transition as this technology moves forward from a labor perspective. On the training piece specifically, and let me thank you for your work and activism on this issue. I think the mistakes that have been made, if you look at the trade adjustment program and other sort of worker transition programs that we've tried in this country, just sort of blanket or loose training really doesn't work. We really need to think strategically about training those workers for specific jobs in this economy. What really concerns us as we look at this transition is, look, there's no question that there are going to be jobs created as we moved to autonomous vehicles and other advanced technologies in the economy. But a lot of those new jobs are not going to be ones that our members in the truck and bus side are ready for, prepared for. So I think the training piece is critical here, and really making sure that we're training them to a specific job.
Yes. I knew Mr. Hunt, by the way. A lot of respect for him.
Fine man. I had the opportunity to work and travel with him on occasion, and certainly was a pleasure. With regards to training, let me mention, I did mention earlier that we do see the driver being a indispensable part of the transportation and movement of goods for the foreseeable future, and I really don't think that these autonomous or driver-assisted technologies are going to result in a displacement of drivers. But we do need good training for our truck drivers, and we need to be attracting more people into our industry to help us meet the shortage. Mr. Willis did mention pay and benefits, and that is an important part of attracting drivers. Drivers in many cases are underpaid, and they need to be paid appropriate for the job that they do and the sacrifices they make. And so, but I would say there's a really good example right now where we are seeing a lot of discharging military veterans being trained before they discharge in driving of commercial vehicles, and I'm sure other trades, but we are seeing a benefit in our industry right now where we have discharging military veterans coming with their commercial driver's license before they discharge. And so I think that's a great example where we have people who are retiring being displaced from military service and being prepared to enter a civilian occupation, and we're directing them to where we have a need and a shortage, and they're doing a fantastic job for us.
Anybody else on the panel? Thank you.
Well, in terms of what I saw with Waymo or what I saw with Uber, and then I did get a preview of the Tesla truck, which is going to be it's like an office environment. The steering wheel's in the middle. You can see right down the front of the truck, and there's a lot of technology there. So the question really that I have is, I mean, the technologies are out there. Waymo's still having trouble with snow and fog, and they're kind of solving rain. But GPS is not enough to locate a vehicle on a road. They're going to drive every road in America. Every road is going to be gridded and surveyed in 3 different ways. But then, so that takes care of part of the equation. But are these vehicles going to have to communicate with one another? I think they are, to make it work fully integrated. And one question I have for Ms. Terry is the availability of spectrum, which the FCC is dawdling on because, hey, we might have 8G or 10G on our phones so we can get more instantaneous whatever. Oh, sorry, we just used up the spectrum the trucks could use. I mean, how critical do you think it is, or do you think the technology is not going to need vehicle-to-vehicle communication?
Thank you for that question. National Safety Council supports DSRC, or Dedicated Short Range Communication Technology, as that safety redundancy that we don't really have in motor vehicles today. It has a greater range than the LiDAR or radar that some systems are dependent on today, and it's available today and can be deployed. It really for trucking specifically, that connected aspect, I think, is going to be vital to some of the technologies and systems that they want to deploy on the roadways. So DSRC coupled with some of these other technologies, I think, is going to be the way that that we would hope to see things go. And so if what we can do to encourage DOT to move forward with the rulemaking, again, providing that regulatory certainty, and then also to urge the FCC to ensure that that spectrum is retained for that use, would be a great move forward to see this deployed on the roadways.
Does Volvo, I was going to ask about Volvo, what you feel about this.
Yeah,
I mean, do you think the vehicles could end up being totally autonomous? They don't need to communicate, and they'll have everything they can do, or are they going to need to communicate?
They're absolutely going to need to communicate. So they're going to need to communicate with each other and also with the infrastructure, a red light, a safety zone coming up, something so the vehicle to infrastructure. More of a practical answer to that is that we've done all of our testing and development on the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum. And we need that to deploy the technology whenever it becomes commercially available. If it changes, we're starting over. So 10 years of testing and demonstration would really go away if we have to change to a different type of technology.
And are you aware whether other competing manufacturers are all, I mean, is this kind of looked at as the standard, or even
yes,
though you don't have a standard?
I am here representing a brand, but I'm also speaking on behalf of other OEM truckmen. We work together very often. Yeah, they would say the same thing. We have all worked together. The trucking industry, I'm sure you're aware of this, but we only build about, in the U.S., 200,000 units a year, 250,000 units. Cars build 16 million. So in 1 week, cars will produce what the entire trucking industry produces in a year. So because of that, we have to share. So we have very common standards, all of us. We work together. We work with SAE. We work with a group called the Technology Maintenance Council to develop common standards on how to design and to develop, because there's just not that many of us out there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just a couple thoughts and a question. I know it had a lot of discussion, Mr. Willis, about the concern about job, loss of jobs and that, and training. There'll always be training. Just one word of caution. I just use this analogy. In the 1970s, if Congress would have decided we're going to protect the, hundreds of thousands of phone operators and distort the market, it would have been a complete disaster, because a lot of things has happened, new industries have developed, and so this is a word of caution. We got to get careful we don't do something that's really anti-market and let the market function. I guess when I think of, I really appreciate Mrs. Alt's comments about how you improve the working conditions in the truck, the safety and all that. And I just think of agriculture in my lifetime. I'm a farmer. What we've done with agriculture equipment. It used to be back in the 70s, you could line up 10 farmers at a farm forum, and if they were over a certain age, I can guarantee you 8 of those farmers were missing something, a finger, a hand. I mean, it's just incredible, and that doesn't happen anymore. So safety is just incredible. But I guess on this job worker displacement issue, when you think about it, I guess to Mr. Woodruff, my question is, we have the baby boomers, a lot of stuff for baby boomers. That's a big part of the population going to be retiring. Like at J.B. Hunt, your truck driver workforce, what's your demographics? Because what I'm seeing here, and what I'm thinking is the younger, I would just say millennials, it's just easier. They're more likely as general, they don't want to be gone all week driving. And so I think, so your point about having autonomous on the interstate and doing the other thing, encourage that probably would help that situation. And I guess what I'm saying, well, I see a chart here. In the next 30 years, we expect at least a 40% increase in commerce. So I think the demand for drivers, even with this technology, is going to actually increase. But what happens with all the baby boomers, which I'm thinking is probably a big part of your truck drivers fleet now, and this transition with the next generation, our kids' generation? Can you maybe just expound on that?
Yes, our average age at J.B. Hunt's about 45 years old. I think in organized labor you would find the average age of the workforce higher than that. So we do anticipate as an industry and for J.B. Hunt specifically that we're going to have a large percentage of our workforce that is going to retire 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and it is going to create even a larger challenge than we already have with the driver shortage. So I would say, anything that we do that's driver assist, and as Ms. Alt mentioned, a lot of this automation and things that are being done is appealing to the younger population, and we hope it will be attractive to them.
I totally agree, because I think we've seen technology in our lifetimes just explode, create lots of opportunities, and it's improved our standard of living across the board. So I guess I'm not going to get as concerned maybe Mr. Willis is, because I think a lot of it's going to fix itself. So that's I just think that the technology is a good thing, and I think when I look at these different levels, I know we got all the systems that Ms. Alt talked about that are coming into place. The lane change, the braking, and kind of semi-autonomous. I guess we're going to see a lot more of that in our lifetime. The ones here that are white hair. I guess my last question to Mr. Woodruff and maybe Ms. Alt, to get to this level 4 and 5. Maybe some of it, maybe the interstate would not. It's hard for me in my lifetime to think that we're going to see trucks that are going to leave a factory, go to a warehouse, or go to the final destination point, and all through the city driving and all that, fully autonomous. That's got to be years away, isn't it? Or I think I'm wrong on that?
I tend to think we're decades away from that. I think one of the things that has to be dealt with, in addition to just development of these foundational technologies that will have more immediate safety benefits, we should pursue those with vigor. One of the other challenges, though, is these are being developed, or autonomous vehicles are being developed with a operational domain, meaning what environment and circumstances can it operate autonomously. So it might be a 4-lane divided highway with no other traffic and a sunny day. And so those operational domains are going to have to be expanded over time to be able to do what you're imagining, of being able to pick up at a manufacturer and deliver to a receiver somewhere. We've got a long way to go in the development of the technologies to expand those operational domains where they can do everything that a driver would do. So I see a short-term lots of benefit from a safety standpoint, and I see long-term, you know, what we can imagine, but there are a lot of things that have to happen to get there.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Coming from Detroit and being involved in R&D for the auto industry, I know for a fact I don't anticipate years and years of this technology being used. I think it's important for us to be proactive when it comes to the workforce, because we will have this technology very soon, because we know the cars are progressing, the automobile industry, and you spoke about how the auto industry and the trucking industry is aligned when it comes to technology. Mr. Woodruff, does J.B. Hunt purchase trucks with the AE, the autonomous emergency braking system, and new vehicles that you're adding to your fleet? And how do you realize a reduction, or have you realized a reduction in rear-end collisions through this investment?
Yes, ma'am. All of our vehicles that we bring into our fleet have the forward collision warning systems, which includes the automatic emergency braking. Currently, 96% of our fleet that's on the road today has that technology.
Okay.
We have seen a 60% reduction in rear-end crashes.
That's phenomenal.
And we've seen cases where the accident still happened, but the technology intervened and it reduced the severity and the consequences of that accident. So we are seeing very positive benefits from the technology. Our drivers have embraced it. They see it as being beneficial to them, and in some cases saves them from a very catastrophic situation.
I was just speaking to the trucking industry, and they were saying that they're going to go all over the country promoting the career of being a truck driver because of the need is so great. Is there a place for government when we're talking about moving our commerce through trucking? It's not going to go away. It's going to be a process that we're using. Is there a place for government when it comes to the training? You spoke about something that's near and dear to my heart. That's the veterans who receive this training and they're able to transition after retirement or discharge to the private sector. Is there, we talked about veterans, is there another place for us in government? Is it incentives for grants for education? Is it, where do we find our place to promote a critical job opportunity in America?
Well, I would think that anything we can do to assist people in getting the skills that are needed to drive a truck, and it does require a lot of skill, and there are truck driving schools out there today that many people go through to enter the industry. And anything that can support those training institutions to deliver high quality training so people are very well prepared when they come out in the form of grants and in the form of student loans and those types of things, I think would be beneficial for making it a little bit easier for people to make that decision to pursue a career in trucking.
My last just follow-up question to anyone on the panel, what are the barriers to becoming a truck driver?
I think a lot of it's mental. I mean, people have a perception that the trucking industry is this old, stodgy industry. It's a very dynamic, highly technological, advanced industry. And whenever we bring anyone into the cab of a truck or walk them around, they're always like, oh my gosh, this is just like a car. And so I think if we could change the easy thing to answer, change the perception of the kid that's 18 to 20 years old that's even considering a vocational career. And that would be tremendously helpful.
Okay.
I might just add to that too, because there is a perception when you think of trucking that it is over the road, long haul, gone away from home 2 to 3 weeks at a time, and there is a percentage of the driving that does require that. But there is a lot of jobs within the trucking industry that are dedicated types of jobs where the driver is serving a specific customer in their home every night. There's jobs within our intermodal division where the driver's home every night and he performs a shift-type driving job. There are cases where a driver could come drive a straight truck. It doesn't have to be an 18-wheeler. Yeah. So there are a large number of jobs driving in the industry, and so people need to appreciate and understand the diversity and all the variety of options that people can do, and they don't all require you to be away from home for that long a period.
That's good to know.
Well, you know, we talked about this earlier, but and I'll reiterate it. It is right. These are difficult jobs. You're asking people to be away from their families in many situations. And the wages and the benefits need to keep up with that and need to compensate, you know, drivers and make these jobs that are something that can support working families. The idea that we're going to, you know, bring technology into the cab and make them more interesting jobs, I think there's some safety advantages as been discussed, but at the core of the driver shortage, at the core of making these more attractive jobs is to have a wage scale and a benefit scale that really keeps up with what we're asking these drivers to do.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go with Mr. Smucker, then Mr. Lipinski, then Ms. Napolitano.
Thank you, and I know we're running short on time, so I'll ask just a couple very quick questions. So, you know, this is a fascinating discussion. I appreciate the chairman scheduling this roundtable, but you know, I'm very interested in what will happen in technology. I think our role in the federal government is essentially, to some degree, stay out of the way and allow companies to compete to develop technology. I think we will see improved safety and we'll see improved competitiveness in what is really a global environment. We of course, need to ensure there's a standard platform and that we have regulations that apply across the country and not done on a state-by-state basis. But I guess my question to those of you, the manufacturers developing the technology, are there any barriers that exist currently that we should be addressing to allowing this to continue to develop? I'm saying from a regulatory barrier.
Well, I think you've hit on that, and that is that our customers use trucks in every state. So for us to develop technology, we would need it to be able to be used across the country. And in fact, we're, as a global manufacturer, as most of the manufacturers are today, it'd be great if we actually had harmonized standards across countries, but maybe
So
that's
that would be
beyond
your number one ask as a next step?
a federal preemption for the design.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And then the second question is, you know, I think there will be a real impact on trucker jobs, and I think Mr. Willis absolutely has a point. And so I think we have to be realistic about, in our discussion about the impact. And this isn't just trucking. This is going to be, you know, I tour factories across my district, and I see machines in place that are doing the work of 4 or 10 people that have been there, you know, just a few years ago. And so I don't think we're being realistic if we're saying it's not going to impact jobs. Maybe there'll be other jobs created that replace it. It might not impact jobs for a long period of time. It might only change jobs. I don't know the answers to those, and I also don't know the federal role. But I do think we have to be realistic about the discussion. And so my question is, are there studies we can look at? I mean, we've had some discussion here today, but I'm hearing people talk 2 different languages and not even talking to one another about the impact that this is going to have. And I think we're already in the midst of one of the biggest changes in job developments that we've seen in our history, and it's going to continue to happen as we see AI and other autonomous vehicles be placed in the marketplace. And so what information do we have? Who's looking at this? Where can we go to learn more? Trying to project, because if I'm a young truck driver right now, I'm concerned about my future. And I, as a policymaker, I'll at least like to try to understand the impact and see whether, what we can do to address the potential impact. So I don't know, Mr. Willis, you want to start with that?
Well, we agree that look, this transition is going to happen, I think, faster and more broadly and have more of an impact than we've seen other technological changes to this economy over the last several decades. What scholars and academics have looked at in the past is that when workers do lose their jobs because of technology, it takes them decades to recover, and they never really do. So I think getting out in front of this is the right answer. There are a lot of different studies out there about, what percentage of jobs, are really a risk in automation broadly in the economy, not just specific to truck and bus. We can have a discussion about what jobs are at risk and what jobs aren't at risk. But I think thinking strategically about what that suite of labor policies should be is, something that we really do need to talk more about. I don't have some sort of magical answer here. As I said earlier, when you look at trade adjustment assistance that was provided during previous trade debates, we think that fell short, both in terms of protecting workers and really insulating sectors of our economy from unnecessary harm. I don't think the government needs to play, some discussions earlier. I'm not suggesting that the government somehow, bar advancements in technology. That's obviously not, not doable or possible, and not what we're seeking. But I think playing an active role on the labor side is the right role for this committee.
And I imagine it's going to be a gradual change.
Absolutely.
So have training programs already changed to begin to accommodate some of the changes that are occurring now?
Oh, there's no question that within the industry. But again, I'm talking about sort of more broadly as we see a transition of jobs.
Yeah.
And if I may make a suggestion, it may be something that you want to ask GAO to look into, too, about job displacement and what's happened previously. And then if I can also provide some input on your first question about things that we would like to see. I think that one important aspect that hasn't yet been touched on today is consumer education. And that if consumers aren't educated on the technology, they don't know how to use it, they don't know how to operate, especially around commercial vehicles that are using it, you could have some problems there, and it could slow the adoption rate. Also, it could be a safety concern. National Safety Council has been focused on this. We've got a website, mycardoeswhat.org, to help people understand what their vehicles do. But I think that consumer education aspect will be important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for holding this roundtable. I think we touched on some really important issues that we need to deal with here. Jobs situation being one of them, another being the real need for DSRC rule to go forward finally. And the other thing I want to ask about is how do we do as we move from more just safety features, progress more to automation? How do we assure safety? Who's going to be responsible for that? How are we going to do it? Is there a role for simulation in this, or what? I just want to ask for thoughts on that.
I think simulation is a great way to do it off the road, but demonstration actually on the road, working with customers, working with the road designers, working with cities and highways. It's changing. I mean, what this technology will do, it makes the vehicle, whether it's a truck or an airplane or a bus, whatever it is, it's part of a whole ecosystem now, and they can all talk to each other. So it makes it more complex, but yet safer as well, and more productive if it's all talking to each other. So I think the answer is demonstration, simulation, and just put into place policies that allow that to happen without pigeonholing one over the other. I know that's tough to do, but that's really, it's demonstration is what we have to do. There's just too many things, too many obstacles that can make, that we have to adjust for. And the only way to really understand that is to put it in real life practice and learn.
I would just add to that, early adopters, you know, I think can help give the real world applications, can measure the benefits, the impacts on safety. We're not going to go do something that we don't reasonably believe is going to produce a safer outcome, but we're going to measure it and watch it very closely as these things are being deployed, getting driver feedback and making adjustments if necessary. So I think early adopters in real applications will be one of your best barometers as to what the safety outcomes will be. One thing that we do have a concern with, though, with regards to that is that one of the other House committees is working on autonomous vehicles, but has carved out vehicles that are over 10,000 pounds, which means that trucking has been left out of that conversation. And I believe that we need to rectify that, because we need the ATA and others in the trucking industry helping to lay out that regulatory framework, helping to address cybersecurity issues and mixed technology compatibility issues. So there is a whole host of issues that we don't need to isolate just to automobiles and leave out trucks.
And I would, I agree with that. I think that trucks need to move forward and have some standards in place that would not be there if things go forward as they are now. And also just thinking about testing and safety. Real world testing is going to be important, and having the proper controls in place when that happens will also be important to its success. There's also opportunities to do geofencing in certain areas for testing and isolate it. And then also just ensuring that authorities that are out there exercise their authority. So whether it's on the road law enforcement or NHTSA, FMCSA, they have authorities to do recalls and things like that for safety reasons, and that they exercise that authority as needed.
Well, we supported the exclusion for trucks in that other House bill, as we did in the Senate bill. You know, that bill was focused mostly on passenger vehicles. We just simply don't believe that the regulation of passenger driverless vehicles and the commercial side. You know, I think there's sort of unique issues on the commercial side that if Congress is going to do that, should look at it differently. You know, we have regulations that are in place right now on the commercial side between hours of service, you know, whatever the various regulations are, that assume a driver is behind the wheel. And if we move to a different technology, I think the technology's got to, the regulations have to be specific to looking at a new environment for commercial drivers. So I think it is proper for those issues to be separated.
Thank you. One of the things that is very interesting is the port automation in my area. One of the first major transportation users in the U.S. to implement automated technology has been our Long Beach port. They're investing $1.3 billion, Middle Harbor Terminal, fully automated, and has port automation foretold for the trucking industry what changes, and have jobs been replaced with machines, or have enough new jobs and technology been created? How effective has the port automation been, or have you looked at it? Because there's it's Port of LA and the Long Beach, and they're major ports. Trucking is a big part of what they do to move the material that comes from the port, from the ships. I wonder if there's been taken into consideration.
Yes, with a capital Y-E-S to that, yes. You know, the ports, it's one of those things, it's a combination of using automation for the productivity as well as reducing the emissions. is a huge part of what we're working on. So it's both. And I can tell you, using the technology of geofencing, we can, when the vehicle is within a defined area, right around, 2-mile radius around the ports, we can force, with the driver not doing anything, we can force the truck to shift, for example, from a diesel engine to electric drive for that small radius. So we're using technology for emission purposes. So that's probably what we're doing most with the ports. And then, of course, with the ports, as we've talked about with automation truly driverless, we are looking at wherever it's slow-moving, confined spaces, that's a great application for autonomy. And most of the drivers are paid by the mile. This is going 3 miles back and forth, back and forth, back and forth all day. If you could take the congestion out of that, it would be so much more efficient, and the emissions would go way, way down. So we are absolutely working with them both.
One of the advantages on the port side when you have the introduction of automation is that it is a heavily union density place both on the west and the east coast, and those automation issues over the years have been something that's been able to work out at the bargaining table where those current jobs are protected. And I think if you look at the broader economy, I mean, one of the differences between now and sort of past transitions, quite frankly, is that you have less union density in some of these industries. So, the ability to deal with these at a collective bargaining level is reduced. So I think that, gives further credence for the need for policymakers to figure out the proper role as we transition these technologies. So I think the example that you raised on the port side is a good one, but there's a lot of advantages there from a union density perspective that don't otherwise exist.
Well, there is a lot of that truck traffic going through my district because the Alameda Corridor East is mostly in my district, and I have a ton of trucks going daily, hundreds of them. So I would be wanting to be sure that whatever trucks get on the freeway in my area are safe enough, because once a truck has an accident, it stops the whole freeway. And it is a tremendous loss in time, and of course, it's a safety issue. You brought up cybersecurity, Mr. Woodruff. It's interesting because it's a big concern for self-driving vehicles, particularly trucks. Volvo is dealing with them how?
Do you want me to answer that, or Mr. Woodruff?
Sorry, you.
So I think cybersecurity is very important. One of the things we are doing is we are joining a group called the Auto ISAC, if you're familiar with that, Information Sharing Analysis Centers. These are supported by the government, and it's you take an industry, so automotive, so cars and heavy-duty trucks are in an ISAC, and the concept is that you share information about things you've seen on your vehicles, kind of behind the scenes with government support, so, for legal ethics and violations of sharing information you're not allowed to trade. So we're joining this Auto ISAC so that we can learn what's going on with our competitors, and we'll share with what's going on. It's stuff that you're a little uncomfortable with, but when it comes to cyber, you don't compete on that.
Then I, excuse me, I'm very interested in the training aspect of it, because if this eventually becomes more evident in our trucking industry, we want to be sure that anybody displaced can be trained into another segment of transportation.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part. We want to be sure that
trained in transportation segments, so they're either given a chance to train for another position within the transportation industry.
Yes.
Training.
Well, we wouldn't disagree with the need to do that if we find that there are people that are being displaced by the technology.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, panelists. The development of technology is a great thing, but there's also has to be an accepting public, either for a product point of view that purchase the product or in the perception of what's happening around them. So I'd give you GMO food, new Coke, recycled drinking water, and then the idea of driverless trucks. If there's nobody there, a perception to put their foot on the brake pedal, that could be quite a concern for a lot of folks. So, you know, there needs to be bringing the public along at the same time as technology would be advanced or, you know, some viewed forced upon them. So I wanted to ask Mr. Willis a little bit about that. If this is an impact on the number of truckers, jobs, et cetera, where would we get the skilled drivers to still do the specialty work that you would have? You know, maybe we have the autonomous ones running up and down the freeway. I think somebody said during the sunshine on nice days, but where are we going to get the really heavy hauls, the specialized hauls, the off-road for agriculture, mining areas, things like that can much likely be less autonomous? Are we going to have that base of drivers coming up through the ranks to become these skilled drivers, or what do you see the solution is for those specialty haulers?
Well, I think on that specific question, I think that's better left to the Teamsters to talk about sort of that, you know, that industry. You know, again, we've talked a lot. I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I think there's a huge component here on training for the current jobs, but also thinking more strategically about the future jobs in this economy. So I don't know if there's a bus component to your question, or more truck focused, or.
Well, on the drivers specifically, it would seem like you train drivers on the easier hauls as they become more skilled. You can haul those super heavy loads, the wide loads, you know, pulling the space shuttle through L.A., you know, those types of things. But you know, really needed heavy-duty mine equipment, emergency situations like that. I just wondered, will we have that base of bringing drivers through the ranks to have those specialized ones that have years of experience if we go too hard in this direction?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question that's going to change the employment phase of both truck and bus. And I think the issue, well, we should come talk more to you about that. Okay,
let me throw it to Mr. Woodruff here. In the past, we've ATA was asking Motor Carrier Safety Admin to start the process for speed limiters on heavy vehicles. Ultimately, ATA, when a mandate was proposed, along with much of the trucking industry, was not happy with what they came up with. So we've gotten a lot of comments from our smaller truckers in my district that expressed concern with the mandate as one size fits all for speed limiting equipment. And research my office and me have seen has been that these devices are actually prone to increasing crash rates. So again, when we talk about a mandate, one size fits all, we can see it adding costs without creating benefits and not even helping towards the ultimate goal. So I was wondering, does the ATA continue to support the idea of a mandated use for speed limiters, or a system that can be a little more voluntary based on the type of trucking that is more individual?
Well, the ATA's position on speed limiters is that they ought to be applied to all vehicles, and that there ought to be some governed speed for automobiles as well as for trucks. I happen to take a little different position than ATA in that I believe that speed limiters should be used on commercial trucks. All of the commercial trucks that have been manufactured after 2000 already have the components and things that are necessary to set the speed. Speed is, Ms. Terry mentioned a moment ago, is probably about 30% of all of the fatal crashes are related to speed. And so it's hard for me to conceive why it would make sense to take a truck that is ungoverned, that weighs 80,000 pounds, take it off a manufacturing line and let it go out on our interstate highways where your family and mine are traveling and let it go 90 miles an hour. Now, I could start to take people raise their hand, and probably most people would not think that makes sense in here. Now, I could step it down to 80, and a few less hands would go up. I could take it down to 70, and a few less. So to me, the debate ought to be, what should the speed be set at? not whether or not we should use the technology that's not already on the truck. And that's my opinion and not necessarily ATA's.
Could I just add to the member's question? What about, should there be automatic belting in a truck? Should a truck with a drunk driver have some way so that he does not move ahead in a truck?
Not in the U.S., but in Europe, we have what's called an alcohol lock that the driver has to breathe into before the truck will start. So there is technology that is out there. Cab drivers.
I don't even know if drunk driving truckers has been a problem.
Oh, I thought that's what you asked.
Yeah, I'm saying, has it been a problem, and should the U.S. consider such automatic ways to stop a drunk driver from getting behind a drunk?
You know, I have not thought about that, so that's a good thing to think about. Alcohol use in the trucking industry is very low, much lower than the general population getting behind the wheel of a car. So, you know, I think the utility of that is probably minimal. The benefit that could be derived by doing that on all of the commercial trucks would probably not, the cost would probably far outweigh the benefits. The problem is very small.
How about seat belts?
Well,
should they be automatic in trucks?
You know, that's probably a similar situation in that I recently saw something reported where the use of seat belts by commercial drivers is in the 90% range. So we have seen great improvements over the years with drivers using their seat belts. And so that may be getting taken care of just by awareness and just by habits that have been instilled in people from being a very young age to wear their seat belts.
Ms. Terry seems to want to comment on these issues.
Yeah, I think there is great benefit to adding some technology to prevent some of these things, like getting behind the wheel if you're impaired, or ensuring that a seatbelt is buckled before the vehicle's able to start and move. And I think especially in the trucking industry where I would think most companies have pretty much a zero tolerance policy for alcohol. And so you can use technology that's available today to be able to ensure that people are compliant. But I think in general, I would agree though with Mr. Woodruff that drunk driving behind the wheel for professional truck drivers when they're operating their vehicle is not a huge issue as it is for the general public too.
Mr. Chairman, maybe a little more. And that's all, you know, good points made there. But again, I'm running legislation right now to do away with the 12% FET on purchasing a truck, which is a barrier towards affordability for people to purchase trucks, whether it's mom and pop organizations, smaller farms like that. And if we're loading up vehicles with more and more costly technology, it isn't necessarily meaning a wide percentage of an issue, then we're just creating more barriers to people being in the trucking business, especially on the smaller scale, and getting drivers into that business that see these as barriers as well. So we want to be really careful, in my view, that we don't over-technologyize these vehicles so that the affordability or the attractiveness of being in the industry goes away. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you all for coming out. Obviously, we've got, and we all knew this already, but we've got a lot of work to do. The technology is coming fast, but we also have to be mindful of you know, obviously the ramifications that come along with that. But thank you all for coming in. I appreciate this format we like. You have a question? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important roundtable. I had another meeting, another hearing going on at the same time. I want to thank our esteemed witnesses for sharing your perspectives on emerging technologies in the trucking industry. and I'm concerned about fatalities on roadways. In fact, last week I learned that deaths on U.S. roadways have increased by more than 5% for the past 2 years, and that 37,000 people lost their lives on our roads in 2016. The stretch of I-95 that runs through Miami-Dade County, which I represent, had more fatalities than any other part of the nearly 2,000-mile interstate highway. Many of those fatal accidents involved large trucks. Suffice to say, I'm pleased to learn about emerging technologies that will reduce accidents and fatalities. However, I'm concerned about the impact automated vehicles will have on jobs, especially in the trucking industry. And I think we should do all that we can to mitigate many of the unintended consequences that come with widespread adoption of automated trucks, starting with increased investment in workers' education and training. So I hope to work with the committee on that goal. Mr. Woodruff, rather than fully automating trucks, do you believe it would be safer to introduce truck automation that would serve as a kind of autopilot for trucks, keeping the driver in place for more critical, difficult driving situations?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think we need to pursue the advanced driver assist technologies. Those are going to be foundational anyway if you ever believe that we would get to autonomous. And those would require the drivers to be at the controls of the vehicle. But we have things like the automatic emergency braking, adaptive cruise control, and those types of technologies that are available today. They're demonstrating great benefits in terms of safety, and we should do everything that we can to deploy those and keep the driver at the wheel. And then we'll have to see what the future holds and whether or not there is even safer benefits that can be derived with more autonomous vehicles in the future. But that's quite a ways out.
Ms. Terry, some of the new technologies being discussed today, like automatic emergency braking and forward collision avoidance, are being produced today on new cars. Do you expect these technologies to be available only on new trucks, or can they be retrofitted onto current or older vehicles?
There are some technologies that we can look at to retrofit on commercial motor vehicles, but I think the more we can get those into newly manufactured vehicles that are getting on the roads today, the quicker that we'll see that turnover in the fleet in general. I know a little bit earlier, my fellow panelists said that in about 3 to 4 years, they'll turn over their fleet to get certain type of technology throughout the fleet. And that's pretty impressive amount of time to be able to get, especially for commercial vehicles, get that turnover in the fleet that we don't really see on the passenger vehicle side. And I think that those foundational technologies we refer to as level 2, like automatic emergency braking, advanced cruise control, those are can be very important to prevent crashes that are occurring right now.
Okay. I might just add a comment to that as well, as when oftentimes the larger trucking companies adopting these technologies early, they do trickle down into the secondary market when we trade those and replace them. And oftentimes you have your smaller trucking companies, maybe even independent operators that will buy their trucks on the secondary market. So you're going to see these technologies make their way deeper into the industry. As we put those on at the OE, we will use those for a normal trade cycle of 4 or 5 years, and then they'll be traded but continue to operate on our nation's highways. So I think you're going to see a little bit of a trickle down of these technologies, and we need to be thinking about, you know, how do we ensure that they continue to function properly and that they're used as others put those vehicles to work.
Mm-hmm. Just one other. Are we educating the workforce about these technologies, Mr. Willis?
Well, thank you for your comments about the need to mitigate the job loss that we believe is going to be significant, both on the truck and bus side and on the broader economy, as we've talked about. Again, from our perspective, there should be a focus on continuity of employment where that's possible, to find jobs within an industry or within the employer. Where that's not possible, active labor policies to train those workers for specific jobs that do exist in the economy, and to look at sort of past transition efforts, TA on the trade side, other programs like that, and figure out ways that we can do better, both in terms of better protecting workers that have long-term unemployment and strengthen our economy, because we just, given the state of our economy, wage inequality, as we've seen productivity increase, putting a lot of unemployed truck and bus drivers out there, even if it's a longer-term time frame, is not the right approach without some type of mitigation strategy, as you've outlined. So I think that's definitely something that we all need to think about and consider.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for saving me until last. I have a remedial question, and I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of everybody else. I've been on the Transportation Committee for a little while, and I have never been to a roundtable about the upcoming pilot unemployment, because autopilot's going to put everybody out of business, and we're going to have the skies flying unmanned. And we're talking about the most expensive and most sophisticated piece of machinery that's in our transportation infrastructure. I'm always surprised when we're talking about what's coming next and coming so fast in trucking that has not yet come to our skies. And as a result, I'm worried about getting in your way more than I'm worried about not giving you the tools that you need to succeed. Can you tell me why it is that we feel like we're going to bring automation to fairly basic vehicles in incredibly unregulated environments before we bring automation to incredibly sophisticated vehicles in the most regulated of environments?
Are you talking about in aviation, or?
I'm saying we've been bringing automation to aviation for about 100 years. Wikipedia tells me, but I don't have any constituents writing and saying we got to get these pilots out of the cockpit, and that's gonna help us to improve efficiency and bring down costs. The more we talk about how to help you, sometimes I'm from the federal government, I'm here to help, is not the most comforting thing that you hear. It would seem to me that with all of the innovation going on right now, staying out of the standards business for a little while longer could bring more benefit than getting into the standards business today, under the assumption that no one's leaving the driver's seat anytime soon. If you think someone's getting out of the driver's seat sometime soon, I can understand why it is we would want a nationwide federal standard moving right along. But a lane departure warning, I don't need a federal standard for a lane departure warning. Volvo can set that up for Volvo, and Freightliner can do it for Freightliner. Tell me what it is that's so different about trucking that we're having these conversations about putting people out of business in trucking in ways we haven't put people out of business driving airplanes.
Well, I think, autopilot on the aviation side is a significantly different technology than the driverless vehicles. I mean, the autopilot is designed as technology to help pilots pilot an aircraft. And I think the technology that we are eventually talking about here today is technology that will actually replace a driver. In the aviation side, you have long-time regulations that require 2 certified crewmen in that aircraft cabin. If we want to do that on the truck and bus side to mandate staffing via regulation, we'll be all for that. But I think that's a different ask of what the industry is doing here. So I think you're sort of, with all due respect, sort of mixing sort of both the policy and the...
At the end, Mr. Willis. That's why we're in the circle of trust here at the end to have that.
Absolutely.
But so to a man and woman on the panel, then you would say your biggest concern is regulators not moving fast enough for you, not regulators moving too fast to help in this space?
I'll defer to my fellow panelists, but you know, I think that look, we've said that this technology is going to advance, and we can sort of argue about when it's actually going to occur, but the amount of money and time that is spent advancing autonomous vehicles and other advanced technologies wouldn't be occurring, in our opinion, but for some replacement of frontline workers. We think that's coming maybe faster than others, but in any event, from a labor policy perspective, if not from an economic regulation perspective, we need to do something to help regulate that job loss and to prepare for that job loss, both in terms of fairness to frontline workers, but also the negative consequences for our broader economy.
Is that going to be Volvo's position that Congress doing more is going to be more helpful to you than Congress doing less, as Volvo is innovating?
I think Congress has to do a bit more, only because the vehicles are in our public space. You know, a pilot on an airplane is up there by himself, or even on in an airport. There's not as many public folk around him, whereas in any kind of vehicle, we're all in it together. So it's more of a societal acceptance, and then, of course, the public safety.
And I'll add, from a safety standpoint, I think it would be, it's incredibly hard for regulation and laws to keep up with technology. But one way I think where Congress could be helpful is to help out with data sharing. And you brought up aviation. One of the things that has led to us having this great number of years of not having a fatal commercial airline crash is data sharing. And it's getting all the parties to the table, the manufacturers, the operators, labor, the regulator, to talk about data they've learned about a particular airport or a particular type of plane, and make corrections then and improvements system-wide. And Congress has enabled the aviation industry to do that, and to be able to see that same type of protection for the auto industry, I think could yield a lot of benefits, because I think this technology is such that you don't have to carve out time for your day necessarily to go get a recall addressed. It's over-the-air updates for some of this.
Well, put me in the category of folks who are afraid of squelching innovation as opposed to promoting innovation. When you decide that we haven't promoted properly and we're getting into the squelching arena, come and knock on my door. I won't have the pride of authorship that prevents me from hearing that discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And quick correction: it doesn't require two in the cockpit on commercial operations with an autopilot. Some do, most don't. Again, thank you all for being here, and we're going to continue to do these, and we're trying to get as much information as we can from all the stakeholders, everybody involved in that. As I mentioned, there's obviously some issues we're going to have to deal with as we move forward, labor being one of those. But thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it.
Thank you.